Thank you, Chairman Cox, members of the board. Good morning. Today, we discuss the proposed spending of $6.4 billion of taxpayer money as outlined in the fiscal year 2020-2021 operational plan, also known as the budget. Despite a slight increase in year-over-year spending, this is not a typical budget. Heading into a new fiscal year, the county faces unprecedented challenges. Let's set the stage with a short video on the environment we are living in. If you could, go ahead.
Tonight, we have brand new information about San Diego's first confirmed case of coronavirus.
We're looking at a very tough day in the markets, and frankly, I think there's a real question now over how much the coronavirus spills into the real economy.
Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it.
I'm a public health nurse.
Have fever, like you feel like chills?
I'm Leon Williams, and I appreciate very much what the board is doing now.
When all this started, we were building a budget that planned to expand many services, but the dramatic developments of recent months abruptly changed that, and now we face new realities. I'll share highlights related to these events: the COVID-19 pandemic, social justice and racial equity, the economy, and our strategy to address them. First, COVID-19. Battling it is the county's top budget priority. The Health and Human Services Agency will see a budgetary increase tied to our COVID-19 efforts and CARES Act spending. That includes our test, trace, and treat strategy, increasing behavioral health telehealth capacity, expanding child welfare services, distributing medical supplies, food distribution, and shelter to vulnerable populations, planning for a safe election, and much, much more. The second challenge is social justice and racial equity. Nationwide conversations are driving change in our society's approach to public safety. These demands require an examination of county policies and how we engage our residents. This begins in the public safety group with reform initiatives and de-escalation training to help strengthen community trust. We are adding resources to citizen oversight of law enforcement. These efforts will continue across the organization with the newly created Office of Equity and Racial Justice, which will examine bias within the county enterprise, across the enterprise, and also in the region. The last overriding challenge I will highlight is our economic situation. Shutdowns aimed at fighting the coronavirus have shaken the economy. Revenue projections plummeted as service needs escalated. However, the law requires us to balance the budget. The county's long-practiced fiscal prudence is helping us maneuver through these unprecedented times. But that planning has its limits, and we can't continue all services at current levels indefinitely. The recommended budget proposes dipping into reserves, over $200 million in those reserves over the next 2 years, giving us time to make long-term adjustments. There are not many new programs or capital investments, and it eliminates some vacant staff positions and will make operational adjustments to meet the demands of new regulatory requirements. But rest assured, the county is not cutting core services, and we will boost our commitment to assisting vulnerable populations. The budget will build out the regional continuum of care, focusing on diversionary services such as crisis stabilization units and mobile crisis response teams to provide early intervention and treatment and avoid inundating our public safety partners. We are able to do this at a time when many local governments are struggling to stay afloat. This spending plan transformed the county to address current challenges and better position itself for the future. I will now turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Ebony Shelton, and our general managers to provide additional highlights of the budget. Ebony?
Thank you, Helen. Chairman Cox, members of the board, let's begin. Fiscal year 1920 brought significant revenue challenges compounded by fixed cost growth that would have otherwise been supported through these dollars, resulting in a gap between resources available and amounts needed to structurally balance the budget. In light of economic conditions and with an eye towards the future, the approach used to build this budget was deliberate and assumes no new programs or expansion of existing programs and no additional staffing, with exceptions for items that were previously approved by the board or necessary for emergency response. To close the budget gap, departments use a combination of strategies, including use of unassigned balances in the general fund, using resources outside of the general fund, and reevaluating needs for various programs that were slated for growth, including the capital program. And recommendations for service reductions have been made in every group with the exception of the Health and Human Services Agency. The next slide looks closer at the gap closing strategies in the budget by business group. Here on the left, we see the gap by group totaling $274 million in fiscal year 2021, with the majority, or $231 million of that gap, being driven by revenue shortfalls. The remaining columns from left to right represent corresponding budget strategies. Starting with one-time resources, this $109 million includes Proposition 172, Public Safety Sales Tax, and in the Health and Human Services Agency, or HHSA, intergovernmental transfers, securitized tobacco revenues, and state general fund resources, and resources committed for environmental health and planning and development services. Next is $28 million of recommended service reductions, largely in public safety or PSG, as the sheriff manages vacancies, a reduction of 70 vacant positions in probation with no impacts to the safety of the public. The Land Use and Environment Group and the Finance and General Government Group, or FGG, will manage staffing and reduce support services. Deferrals and suspensions represent $66 million in cost avoidance, largely in the Health and Human Services Agency, including previously planned growth in staffing and in behavioral health services as business process reengineering opportunities are considered. Public Safety Group and the Land Use and Environment Group will also slow vehicle replacements and facilities projects where it's appropriate to do so. And where these mitigation strategies were exhausted, the final mitigation strategy is a recommendation to use $71 million of unassigned general fund balances. This amount is concentrated in public safety to maintain core services, but also in the Health and Human Services Agency for essential health and social service programs, and in the Land Use and Environmental Group for environmental health and permit services, among others. With the budget strategy and gap solutions covered, I'll now turn to how this culminated into the county's overall budget, starting with total appropriations. The recommended budget totals $6.4 billion in fiscal year 2021, an increase of $159 million, or 2.5%. And in alignment with the budget strategy, the increase is being driven by two factors: salary and benefit costs, which includes negotiated increases in retirement costs, and the response to COVID-19 public health emergency. Looking at the operational plan by group agency, appropriations for the Public Safety Group, the Land Use and Environment Group, Capital Program, and Finance Other are decreasing from the previous year, while the Health and Human Services Agency and the Finance and General Government Group are increasing. Pandemic response and safety net programs are driving the increase in the Health and Human Services Agency, and the increase in the Finance and General Government Group is due to one-time upgrades of key information technology systems. The general managers will discuss budget drivers in more detail later in this presentation. So next, let's take a look at total staffing. Countywide, staffing levels are recommended to decrease by 95 staff years, with the majority of the decrease, or 100 vacant positions, in public safety. An increase of 9 staff years in the Land Use and Environment Group is recommended, along with a net decrease of 4 vacant staff years in the Finance and General Government Group. Next, I'll turn to funding sources. Focusing on the right side of this chart, nearly half of the county's total revenue comes from state, federal, and other intergovernmental sources. These revenue categories are experiencing the most significant changes. Consistent with previous projections, state revenues are anticipated to decrease overall from declining statewide sales tax receipts, notably for the Proposition 172 fund, which supports regional law enforcement services, and in health and public safety realignment revenues, along with state gas tax receipts, which support public roads. In contrast, federal revenues will see a net increase, largely from coronavirus-related stimulus funds. The budget also includes the use of $370.7 million of one-time fund balances, including $150 million of unassigned fund balance that's been used to balance the budget. The result of this will be reflected in our financial statements later this year. To provide an illustration of anticipated impacts, this table will provide an estimate of general fund unassigned fund balance. At the end of fiscal year 18-19, the county had just over $712 million available in reserves. Taking into account results and amounts planned for the budget, we anticipate the year-end balance to be about $611 million. While that's a significant resource, the administrative code requires the county to maintain a minimum general fund reserve equal to 2 months of expenses for unanticipated needs, which is now estimated to be $707 million, leaving a gap of more than $95 million. In fiscal year 21-22, $135 million of general fund reserves are planned to balance the budget, effectively adding to the amount of the projected gap under a worst-case scenario. Simply put, the county will fall short of its minimum reserve requirement, and this must be restored. The budget includes a 3-year replenishment strategy supported by projected growth in general purpose revenue. Important to note is that the plan constrains this revenue source, meaning that it wouldn't be available for spending on any other activities. As general managers will detail next, the budget has a solid plan to manage through an uncertain economy and environment and to ensure ongoing fiscal stability into the future. I'll now turn to Holly Porter, Deputy Chief Administrative Officer and General Manager of the Public Safety Group.
Good morning, Chairman Cox and members of the board. The Public Safety Group includes 10 departments with a total group recommended budget of just over $2 billion. This represents a decline of $13.5 million or 0.7% less than the group's budget last fiscal year, as our criminal justice departments have all been negatively impacted by reduced sales tax revenue, vehicle license fees, and fewer general purpose revenue dollars than anticipated before the COVID-19 pandemic. Public Safety Group departments are using available trust fund and other fund balances on a one-time basis to help cover the major losses in program revenue. Along with these resources, some program and service reductions and the elimination of vacant positions within the group are proposed. The Public Safety Groups include 7,456 staff positions. Public Safety Group staffing in the proposed budget will decrease by 100 positions or 1.3% less than the previous fiscal year. The staffing reduction will be in vacant positions eliminated in probation and the Sheriff's Department. Both departments have been significantly impacted by declines in Prop 172 and realignment funding. Despite these significant challenges and budget gaps, there are no recommendations for staff layoffs or demotions. In order to maintain essential public safety services, the Sheriff's Department is utilizing one-time resources, expenditure reductions, deferral or suspension of projects, and unassigned general fund monies to mitigate the shortfalls. Changes in service delivery include decreases in detention-related services, administrative and facility costs, and changes in services provided by the Sheriff's Department to the Superior Court for court security. The Sheriff's Department recommended budget includes a net loss of 30 vacant positions, which includes a decrease of 32 staff positions from a food services program with probation that is ended, 4 staff positions after a reduction in reentry services and detentions, 3 positions reduced at the request of contracting agencies, which includes 2 from the City of Lemon Grove and 1 from Del Mar Fairgrounds, and 2 positions after streamlining medication processes in sheriff's jails. The recommended budget also includes some added positions, 2 positions in the Sheriff's Court Services Bureau for assistance requested by the Health and Human Services Agency at the San Diego Psychiatric Hospital, and 9 positions for the Homeless Assistance Resource Team to provide in-person support for the homeless populations in the unincorporated area as requested by your board this year. Funding for the San Diego County Sheriff's Department enables law enforcement to respond to distress calls and maintain community safety. An annual report prepared by the San Diego Association of Governments calculates the law enforcement officer to resident ratio for agencies across San Diego County. As you can see from this slide, the Sheriff's Department employs 1.13 sworn officers per 1,000 residents in the areas where the Sheriff's Department provides services. This is one of the lower staffing ratios in the region, and it is well below the national average of 2.8 officers per 1,000 residents. In early 2019, and far in advance of the recent focus on police reform in our country, the Sheriff's Department reached out to the Center for Policing Equity, a research center based at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. The nonprofit looks at data surrounding police interactions with the community with the goal of reducing disparities. The Center for Policing Equity is currently analyzing information collected under the Racial and Identity Profiling Act and will also survey Sheriff's Department personnel and provide feedback about the department's culture. In the coming fiscal year, the Sheriff's Department will use feedback from this analysis to examine departmental policies, procedures, and training. In June of 2020, the Sheriff's Department issued a directive requiring deputies to intervene and stop excessive force by other officers and to report those incidents immediately to a supervisor. The directive is part of deputy training, but will now be permanently reflected in the department's updated policies and procedures manual. In the coming fiscal year, the Sheriff's Department will also implement trainings that address cultural diversity and accountability. As the first law enforcement agency in the region to provide de-escalation training, many deputies beginning in 2019 have already been trained in the latest de-escalation techniques. Those trainings will continue this fiscal year, reaching all sworn personnel, and the training will be included in the department's policies and procedures. The Sheriff's Department understands the value of public outreach and relationship building. Deputies take time to engage with the communities they serve and host events ranging from school activities to safety preparedness trainings. In 2019, the Sheriff's Department took part in nearly 1,800 community engagement events across the region. The District Attorney continues to identify innovative and effective ways to better support victims of crime. In the coming year, the District Attorney will address the need to establish a family justice center in North County. There's a call for victims and witnesses of domestic violence, human trafficking, child molestation, and sexual assault to have greater access to community-based services under one roof. Co-located services that address trauma in a comprehensive and integrated manner support social justice for victims and their families, and empower them to transition from victim to survivor. The District Attorney's Office recently implemented a variety of criminal justice reform strategies to include adult misdemeanor diversion and mental health diversion. Redirecting youth away from the criminal justice system is a top priority for the District Attorney and for all of the criminal justice partners within the public safety group. Last year, the District Attorney announced a juvenile diversion initiative to provide San Diego County youth an opportunity to address underlying causes of delinquent behavior. At-risk youth will be able to engage in a variety of community-based intervention services, including case management, substance use, and behavioral health services, in addition to restorative justice. The initiative is scheduled to launch this fiscal year and will further reduce the number of youth in juvenile hall. Workplace justice is another area of focus for the District Attorney's Office in the coming year. The District Attorney will launch a workplace justice team focused on prosecuting unfair business practice, wage and hour violations, payroll tax evasion, wage theft, labor trafficking cases. The public defender recognizes a criminal record creates barriers to employment, housing, and civic engagement. Through a nationally recognized award-winning program called Fresh Start, the Office of the Public Defender offers comprehensive criminal record relief to help people move past their mistakes. The Public Defender has a goal this fiscal year to assist 2,000 clients and achieve 90% conviction relief on petitions received. In addition to these areas of focus in the budget, the Office of the Public Defender has been significantly impacted in workload by two changes in state law. Penal Code 1437 makes it possible for a felony murder inmate to apply for resentencing if that inmate was not the actual killer. And according to Penal Code 3051, another recent change in state law, any youth offender who is 25 years of age or younger at the time of their crimes is entitled to a youth offender parole hearing. The purpose of the hearing is to provide for a meaningful opportunity for that person to obtain release. Providing the appropriate representation to clients, as dictated by the changes in state law, will be both a priority and a challenge for the public defender in the coming fiscal year. This additional work is on top of the significant resources required to defend 5 pending death penalty cases. These increases in workload for the public defender will require additional staffing resources, which will be addressed in the CAO change letter later this month. Probation faced a large funding gap this fiscal year, primarily due to declines in Prop 172 and realignment revenues. However, even before pandemic-related losses in revenue, probation faced budget challenges because of reductions in federal revenue for youth services, declines in fee revenue, and changes at the state level that shifted more juvenile detention responsibilities from the state to the county. However, the probation department has remained agile and flexible. In recent months, the state has been releasing thousands of inmates early from state prison to be supervised locally by county probation officers. Probation officers are diligently working to supervise and support this temporary but unpredictable influx of newly released state inmates. Due to sharp declines in program revenue, probation proposes to eliminate 70 vacant positions as they continue to align the organization with national best practices. The 70 targeted positions are from programs outside the department's core mission, changes to a program, or in a few cases, the work will be distributed to other units within the department. The budgetary challenges are significant. However, we are proposing no layoffs or demotions. In 2019, the Board of Supervisors approved the probation department contracting with the Council of Juvenile Justice Administrators. The council co-created the youth in custody practice model with Georgetown University's Center for Juvenile Justice Reform. The council made 55 recommendations to align San Diego County's juvenile detention operations with the national best practices for conflict de-escalation and staff youth engagement. Based on these recommendations and those provided by Georgetown, probation is now putting the finishing touches on a 3-year strategic plan for youth services. Last year, the probation department began the process of separating into 2 distinct operations, adult and juvenile services. The needs of youth and adults are very different, and training for probation officers must reflect those differences. In the coming year, probation will fully separate all adult and youth training programs. Youth services will include specialized training on adolescent brain development, trauma-informed care, implicit bias, and restorative practices. Probation will also add youth advisory councils and a volunteer coordinator to further improve the programs and services provided in our juvenile detention facilities. Fire safety and maintaining superior firefighting and emergency management capabilities continues to be a top priority for the Public Safety Group. This year, the Fire Authority will continue work on their strategic plan goals with an emphasis on community risk reduction at the neighborhood level. The formation of the San Diego County Fire Protection District and the transition from CSA 135 to a fire district will be complete by the beginning of next calendar year. 4 capital improvement fire station projects will be moving forward this year, including Palomar Mountain and Mount Laguna. Sunshine Summit Fire Station will get a new fire engine bay, and planning will begin for a new fire station in East Otay Mesa. The county's Office of Emergency Services will launch an earthquake early warning pilot program this fall, which will allow residents to take cover in advance of heavy shaking. We know that safety is a basic tenet of overall wellness and quality of life. Despite significant fiscal challenges, the Public Safety Group departments are committed to maintaining the status of San Diego County as one of the nation's safest urban regions while reducing recidivism and offering diversion programs that direct people away from the criminal justice system. At this time, I'll turn the presentation over to Acting HHSA Director, Dean Arabatsis.
Thank you, Holly. Good morning, Chairman Cox and members of the board. In putting together a recommended operational plan, we know that when the economy turns downward, demand for our services goes up. Today, I'm presenting a balanced budget that takes into consideration the current pandemic, the resulting increased demand for our services, and the financial hurdles presented by COVID-19. We have accomplished this balanced budget through the strategic use of one-time funding and increased allocations from the state and federal governments. Additionally, we are re-engineering our business processes, including leveraging telework to reduce facility costs and pausing some new investments we had planned before the corona pandemic. Our proposed budget allows us to manage the anticipated needs for this year and places us in a good position to adapt and adjust as needed throughout the year and into the uncertain future as we learn more about what kind of revenue we can expect. The Health and Human Services Agency has a total recommended budget of nearly $2.5 billion, supporting 6 departments, the county successor agency, and administration. This is an increase of $205 million, which is about 9% higher than last year. More than half of this increase is related to CARES Act funding for pandemic response efforts. We are also funding caseload increases for CalWorks and General Relief, and are incorporating several initiatives to strengthen county priorities recently approved by your board. For example, $25 million to increase the behavioral health treatment capacity and almost $24 million to address homelessness in the unincorporated areas. The budget also includes $54 million for scheduled salary and benefit increases. Actions to offset these increases include reductions such as limiting management reserves at the agency level and removing prior one-time costs. There are no service or staffing reduction proposed in the budget this year because we are able to draw some additional state and federal funding as well as the strategic use of one-time resources to close the gap. Our budget positions remain unchanged at 6,771. To ensure we can continue to provide critical services in a timely manner, the agency will monitor departmental metrics and may shift staff among departments as necessary to meet the greatest needs. In addition, we are committed to augmenting capacity for core public health programs by shifting 80 positions from other areas within the agency. A top priority for the upcoming year is continuing to respond to the pandemic. Over the past few months, your board has allocated over $387 million of CARES Act funding for programs and services which began last fiscal year and will continue. We are investing in the areas of testing, tracing, and treatment, or T3, telehealth, economic stimulus for small businesses and restaurants, childcare, food services, and pandemic response funding for cities. Setting up T3 continues to be a massive undertaking, including hiring hundreds of staff and setting up a variety of testing sites such as drive-up, walk-in, and no appointment, and having the flexibility to deploy testing sites into areas disproportionately affected by COVID-19. In response to the many communities within our region, we have been deepening the cultural diversity and competency of our TRACE team so that we can serve residents effectively. While responding to the pandemic, the agency also remains committed to delivering hundreds of core services and programs to meet myriad needs of our community. My presentation today will highlight investments made in the following critical service areas: strengthening individuals and families, addressing homeless and affordable housing, and providing behavioral health and public health care. Our budget includes an additional $28 million to serve those who are facing tough economic times, with much going to meet the increased demand for safety net programs like CalWORKs and General Relief. We are also making investments to improve equity for our child welfare services, or CWS, families. For example, we want to address the disproportionate representation of African Americans in our system and assist parents to reunify with their children. We are doing this through a cultural competency training program that has already begun in CWS and will be deployed across the agency. We are also making efforts to increase and enhance recruitment and retention of foster families who represent the demographics of our children in our care. For seniors, we will continue implementation of the aging roadmap and initiatives like Alzheimer's awareness and support to improve quality of life for them and their caregivers. In any given month, HHSA programs serve more than 1 million San Diegans with benefits like food, job support, and cash aid. Since the pandemic, there has been greater need for services or increased need for higher benefit amounts. We serve nearly 5,000 children and their families in CWS, from foster care to adoptions to guardianship, and 28,000 seniors in our in-home supportive services program with over 3 million hours of services per month. With COVID-19, the demand for home-delivered meals for seniors and disabled individuals more than tripled. We went from 28,000 to 85,000 per week in very short order, with more than 360,000 meals delivered in June alone. Thanks to our contracted community service providers, we were able to ramp up quickly so that people could remain safely at their homes. We are increasing our budget by almost $33 million for efforts addressing homelessness and affordable housing. The largest of these investments, with an increase of almost $24 million, was approved by your board in May and includes funding for the hotel motel voucher program and local rental subsidy for the unincorporated area. Additional funding approved by your board includes the Housing Our Youth program, or HOY, to help former youth and young parents who are experiencing homelessness. To successfully transition veterans who are exiting jail, we are connecting them to services like housing and job training while they are still in custody through our Community Care Coordination for Veterans program, or C3. The County's Innovative Housing Trust Fund, the No Place Like Home funding, and other state and federal dollars address housing difficulties in our region. The budget continues existing investments to nearly double the number of affordable housing over 5 years, from roughly 2,600 presently to over 5,000 units by 2025. These investments help veterans, low-income, seriously mentally ill, and others with special needs, as well as homeless individuals and families, secure housing. To expand housing options across the region, we will continue to recruit new landlords to rent to low-income individuals and families, with a target of adding at least 150 to the existing almost 3,600 actively leasing landlords. Over the past 5 years, we've invested more than $300 million in behavioral health services, growing the budget from $442 million in fiscal year 2015-16 to a recommended $762 million in the present fiscal year 2020-2021, an increase of almost $50 million this year. A large part of the funds added for the year support commitments made by the board, including the Behavioral Health Impact Fund, with $25 million going toward capital projects by our community providers and $15 million for telehealth infrastructure, which has already changed lives by making services available during stay-at-home orders. Approximately $10 million is to strengthen our crisis response capacity, including first responder services and patient stabilization, and diversion services to help people get treatment instead of going to hospitals or requiring incarceration. Our focus is on transforming the overall behavioral health system of care from one driven by crisis to one of continuous care and prevention. Behavioral health services plays an essential role in the wellness of the individuals and families of our communities. Mental health and drug treatment programs typically serve more than 100,000 individuals, and in fact, we may see more this year, given the stress of the current health and economic crises. We provide stigma reduction public awareness campaigns, and we've also trained more than 35,000 community members in suicide awareness to reach diverse populations. This pandemic has elevated anxiety and stress, making a strong behavioral health system more important than ever. Public health services will remain at the forefront of the county's focus this year by continuing to lead the COVID-19 response in coordination with the entire community, including the county enterprise, hospitals, healthcare providers, and the cities and representatives across every sector. Meanwhile, the core public health services must continue. While it may feel like the pandemic has stopped a lot of normal activity in our lives, public health does not shut down. Clearly, it is critical for our region that we prioritize our public health infrastructure. This is important not only for the pandemic response and other emergent issues that may arise, but it is also necessary to support public health services aimed at preventing disease, promoting wellness, and providing access to quality care. We will make new investments in public health services by leveraging grant opportunities for efforts like addressing the regional opioid epidemic and increased funding for upgrades and supports of various systems such as the San Diego Immunization Registry to collaborate with county and community partners. We continue to protect the county's health through surveillance of diseases like hepatitis, measles, and HIV, to name a few. We will provide case management services to almost 14,000 children with chronic illness or a disease or disabilities through the California Children's Services Program. Other core public health services include testing and treatment for sexually transmitted diseases, lab work, managing vital records like birth certificates, and providing immunizations and refugee health services. As this pandemic has made very clear, a public health emergency affects far more than physical health. We will work with the resources at hand to provide these services to our communities and brace ourselves for the hardships we have yet to face. Thank you. And I will now turn over to Sarah Gossi to present on the Land Use and Environment Group.
Thank you, Dean. The Land Use and Environment Group's recommended operational plan will put the public's money to work to protect health and safety, preserve the environment, and improve quality of life. LUGE provides direct community services such as road repairs for the unincorporated community, the second largest jurisdiction by population in the region, and region-wide services to 3.3 million residents and 35 million visitors across our 19 jurisdictions. LUGE's proposed budget is $632.2 million. The budget will decrease by $19.8 million, or 3%, as a result of reduced state gas tax revenues and fees for services, which is partially offset by salary and benefit increases due to negotiated labor agreements and additional staffing. The proposed budget includes 1,955 staff years. We are proposing to add 9 new positions. 5 of these positions would be added to the Air Pollution Control District, 1 for the new Sweetwater Place Park, 1 to operate the newly acquired Live Oak Springs water system, and 2 positions to support board-directed ongoing sustainability efforts. LUGE has worked to support and protect the community during the COVID-19 pandemic. While these have been challenging times, we embrace the opportunity to find new ways to serve residents and businesses. To help local businesses weather the economic hardship, Luge departments implemented board direction to defer fees and lease payments for customers and are proactively providing educational materials to guide businesses. Departments are providing new online options for services, including community participation through virtual hearings and workshops, video inspections, and online permit applications. Since March, the demand for county digital library services have increased 67% over the same period last year. Online recreation offerings such as ranger-led virtual hikes and classrooms are also being enjoyed by many. This greater use of technology is serving our stakeholders with improved efficiency and safety, and is anticipated to continue after the health emergency as part of our normal business operations. With a focus on vulnerable populations, Luge will continue to collaborate with the Health and Human Services Agency to identify and respond to emerging public health risks, and will engage with the community to provide education, resources, and opportunities to actively protect their health and well-being. Our budget recommends $56.6 million to support healthy living services. This funding would help us improve air quality and test beach water so we can inform the public when it is not safe to swim. It would ensure the safety of food facilities and built structures through inspections. Part of this funding would also reduce the risk of vector and mosquito-borne illnesses and protect people from hazardous spills in the community while supporting services that increase access to locally produced fresh food. Our budget also recommends $242 million to improve the region's public infrastructure. This starts with building better roads. In light of the economic downturn, this year's goal is to maintain the rating of our roads, or pavement condition index, at the current rating of PCI 63 through the end of fiscal year 2021 with a budget of $40 million. The public infrastructure dollars would also help maintain flood control channels, sewer systems, water districts, and our 8 airports. Unincorporated area residents would receive 2,500 feet of new sidewalks, 60 ADA ramps, and 43 miles of bike lanes. This budget would also include $2.4 million dedicated to the county's unsheltered residents for sanitation in parks and along public infrastructure, as well as for education and social services support. Protecting the natural environment is central to Luge's mission. Within this budget, Luge is recommending $37.3 million to promote environmental sustainability. Services provided with this funding would help the county achieve its climate action mandates through specific measures that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 132,000 metric tons. $1.5 million would build solar panel carports at Sweetwater Lane Park, providing shade and making it a zero net energy park. This budget would help the county acquire 500 more acres of habitat, continuing to build on the tremendous success of the Multiple Species Conservation Program. We would also continue to protect our $1.8 billion agricultural community from invasive pests. In addition, 443 acres of agricultural land would be preserved under the Purchase of Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, and 3,500 trees would be planted throughout the unincorporated region. Another $28.9 million is recommended for clean beaches, streams, rivers, and to continue the county's commitment to clean water through stormwater compliance efforts. It would also build projects to improve water quality, such as trash capture devices, runoff treatment systems, and improvements to sewer lines. To improve air quality in our communities, $12.7 million in funding would be awarded from several state grants for programs that encourage the use of clean technologies. Whether it is teaching people to read, providing teenagers with positive ways to spend their free time, or making sure you get what you pay for, Luge services help improve the quality of life for San Diegans and visitors. This budget recommends $36 million to strengthen the lives of San Diegans. It would help provide activities and a safe place for 8,000 teens during critical hours through the Safe Destination Nights program, and continue adult literacy classes in library high school, through which we confer accredited diplomas on adults. We would inspect 30,000 weighing and measuring devices and verify organic agriculture products to bolster consumer confidence. $21.1 million would also implement new projects to reduce air pollutants in the environmental justice communities of Barrio Logan, Logan Heights, Sherman Heights, and Western National City. $172 million is recommended for capital projects for parks and libraries. Housing affordability is important for our region's quality of life. $5.1 million is recommended in this budget to increase the number of affordable housing units available. We would waive fees and provide pre-approved plans for accessory dwelling units, and also provide rental housing and lodging inspections to ensure more healthy options are available in the unincorporated areas and the cities we serve. I will now turn the presentation to Ebony.
Thank you, Sarah. The final group that we'd like to present to you today is the Finance and General Government Group, also referred to as FGG. The group provides essential internal support services to county departments, as well as key governmental services to internal support departments, such as voter and election services, property assessments and tax collections, passport application processing, marriage services, and accepting and recording of legal documents. The total budget for the group is recommended to be supported by $774.9 million of spending authority, which is an increase of $45.8 million from the 1920 adopted budget. The primary drivers influencing growth are salary and benefit costs, the planned upgrade of key financial and human resource systems, the upcoming presidential election, and resources to support the new Office of Equity and Racial Justice. The budget for the group reflects service reductions across support departments in the form of vacant positions. With that, let's move to recommended staffing levels. The total staffing levels recommended for the group are 1,746 staff years. This represents a net decrease of 4 staff years, driven by the recommended reductions in general purpose revenue to support departments, partially offset by increased staff to support district operational needs. This staffing level represents the needs of the group to meet operational objectives for the coming year, which we will review next. During this unprecedented crisis, the departments provided vital administrative support for the Emergency Operations Center, including media, technology, legal, and financial services. Critical to the safe reopening plan for all county departments, purchasing and contracting and general services secured and installed safety measures and will continue providing this support going forward. Departments quickly mobilized to provide services online instead of inline by using technology as an enabler. This nimbleness will ensure continuity of key government services such as property assessments and tax collection, while also providing a framework to ensure continued civil engagement while adhering to social distancing requirements. And where it makes sense, services have been moved outdoors, such as marriage licenses and ceremonies. In recognition of the historical social movements underway, additional investments have been recommended in alignment with your board's priorities to focus on equity and social justice. The Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board was transferred to the Finance and General Government Group, and preliminary recommendations are to include $450,000 and 3 new FTEs through the budget change letter process in order for the CLRB to exercise its expanded oversight and authority. In addition, the budget recommends $5 million for the newly created Office of Equity and Racial Justice. While this unprecedented environment is driving many changes in our operations, the group will remain focused on mission-critical initiatives in the coming year. In response to the pandemic, under the governor's executive and legislative actions, the county is launching a robust Vote Safer San Diego campaign, which balances health and safety with accessibility, security, and transparency for the upcoming presidential election. All voters will receive mail ballots, and there will be an increase in the number of mail ballot drop-off locations. The changes provide for consolidated polling locations with larger facilities, expanded technologies, and layouts to account for social distancing with locations open for a 4-day period. General Services will manage execution of the county's capital program, including year 2 of a 4-year phase project at the County Administration Center, and start to implement the county's electric vehicle roadmap. And finally, our human resource and finance teams will focus on one-time upgrades of key financial accounting and human resource information technology systems to ensure modern infrastructure is maintained. In closing, let's discuss the road ahead for the county. This operational plan has been crafted in an environment of incredible uncertainty, and as such, this plan is not without risk. We're relying on the use of reserves to balance the budget, and this is a one-time funding source that's, once it's spent, it's gone, and it must be replenished to mitigate against future risks. In addition, we continue to monitor and engage with our partners at the federal and state levels with the understanding that they're not immune from the economic impacts, and ultimately, those impacts may trickle down to us. With these risks in mind and uncertainty regarding the economic recovery, we've mitigated this exposure in the budget based on what we know now. We remain focused on navigating the region through the pandemic and prioritizing equity and social justice while maintaining a balanced budget. And with that, I'd like to turn this back over to Helen for final remarks.
Thank you, Ebony, and a big thank you to the group finance directors and communications teams for the video and the presentation. Well done. While we face many unknowns that have the potential to impact county operations, we should all be reassured by our most valuable county asset, our employees. They work tirelessly to protect the public's health, safety, quality of life, and infrastructure. Many have turned their homes into offices and are also serving as teachers for their children. The demands on them are great, but they steadfastly remain committed to serving the public and fulfilling our vision of a county that is healthy, safe, and thriving. I'd like to thank the people who helped prepare the recommended budget before you today. Thank you to the sheriff, the district attorney, assessor, recorder, county clerk, and treasurer tax collector, who I can always count on to work collaboratively. Thanks to all the general managers and executive leadership team whose direction is irreplaceable. And a special thank you this year to our department heads and our fiscal staff. They had a particularly challenging responsibility to identify and maintain services with diminishing revenue sources. You worked extraordinarily hard, and I really appreciate you. Thank you very much. And finally, thank you to Tracy, Ebony, and the staff in the Office of Financial Planning. Without your bright minds and innovative teams, these numbers and strategies would never come together. Chairman Cox, before I turn it back over to you, I'd like to make one more announcement, and that is to make sure the public is aware that this presentation in its entirety will be available on the county's budget portal. We will not be repeating this presentation at the Wednesday night hearing, so any members of the public who would like to view it in advance, we welcome that. We would actually appreciate you doing that so you have a better in-depth understanding of where our priorities are in the $6.7 billion budget. Mr. Chairman, with that, that concludes our presentation. Thank you very much.